Amputation is one of the most ancient surgical procedures. There have been advancement in surgical technique and artificial limb design, which has been stimulated by aftermath of wars and World War. With better understanding of biology and physiology, the surgical technique and post-operative rehabilitations have improved. But we should also remember that improved prosthetic design or improved artificial limb design does not compensate for poorly performed surgical procedure. Hence, it is important to know principles of amputation. Most of the amputations are dependent on meticulous assessments for favorable outcomes. If assessments are not in place, the morbidities associated with amputations may decrease quality of life of the patient and prevent integration of amputees into community and social life. When we know the basis of amputation in patients, the rehabilitation program can be tailored to improve functional outcome, and we can ensure the adherence of patients to the rehabilitation program. The outcome of every amputation surgery depends on wound healing. The two factors, that is the wound healing and the residual limb for optimal artificial limb fitting and have a good function, are considered as the two important outcomes of amputation. There is always trade-off between the length of stem and wound healing. There is always a decreased complication rate when the amputation is performed at a proximal level. For example, transfemoral amputation. And there is always a maximum function available because there is increased leverage or increased moment arm when the amputation is performed at distal level. For example, transtibial amputation or amputation through the midshaft or the tibia. Here in this slide you see two pictures. One is of proximal level amputation, that is transfemoral amputation, and the other picture shows a photograph of Symes amputation, that is amputation that at a distal level. Let us discuss the factors affecting selection of level of amputation. The three most important factors which affect the or determine the level of amputation are the vascular status of the limb, general medical condition, and third is rehabilitation and function achievement. The most important factor which determines the level of amputation is the function which the person or an individual is going to gain from amputation. However important the function is, other factors take precedence in deciding amputation level, that is the vascular status and general medical condition of the patient. After trauma and malignancy, peripheral vascular status decides the amputation level. Diabetes and vascular status or dysvascular status go hand in hand and affects tissue viability. That is, if the skin has got presence of ulcerations, skin anomalies, tissue deficits, then there is disturbance with micro and macrovascular circulation. This also leads to high energy expenditures while walking. If the patient is approaching old age and frail, general systems are evaluated and it is determined whether the person will be ambulatory or not. The environment for wound healing should be maximized in part by evaluating patient's nutrition status. In case of diabetics, controlling blood glucose level is essential for wound healing. Edema should be minimized, the vascular flow should be optimized, the bacteremia should be eliminated, and there should be appropriate use of antibiotics which influence wound healing. There are two groups of patients who undergo amputation. The first group belongs to category of having dysvascular limbs. The second category involves amputations post trauma to the limb. Now, in vascular amputees, the wound healing and perioperative complications is of concern. The clinical assessment is done operatively and the skin condition is assessed. The presence of hair growth, skin color, and skin temperature provides valuable initial information. Skin perfusion pressures and laser Doppler flowmetry are some of the methods to test skin flap perfusion. There are many ways to evaluate vascular states which can be carried out in rehabilitation settings. If these assessments are not carried out, there is potential for a critical error in determination of amputation level. Methods of assessing patients' ability to heal from vascular standpoint include: first, ankle brachial index; second, toe brachial index; third, transcutaneous oxygen pressure monitoring; fourth, angiograms. The ankle brachial index, or the ratio of systolic pressure in the ankle to that in arm, is known to be a poor predictor of healing when it is at a level of greater than 1.1. It indicates calcification of vessels in diabetic patients. As you know that diabetes and poor vascular status of the limb goes hand in hand. Perfusion is better indicated by toe brachial index, that is the ratio of systolic pressure in the hallux to that in the arm. Transcutaneous pressure of oxygen allows identification of vascular status of the limb, much better than ankle brachial index and toe brachial index. A transcutaneous pressure oxygen level greater than or equal to 40 is associated with primary or delayed healing in 98% of the limbs undergoing amputation, while a transcutaneous pressure of oxygen value of less than 20 is associated with failure universally. Angiograms always remain the central tool for intervention if one anticipates the need for vascular reconstruction in dysvascular segments. Modern techniques that target smaller vessels in patients with lower limb vascular disease require very precise imaging of peripheral vessels preoperatively. This is achieved through angiograms. Several studies have shown of positive outcomes of digital bypass procedures after determining adequate pedal perfusion and identification of vessels. Failure to do so or failure to identify vessels can result in unnecessary amputations. It should also be kept in mind that the patient with diabetes have calcified vessels, and it gives false elevated indicators of circulation. When it comes to patients with gangrene and diabetic complications, researchers have suggested amputating at a level with a good and documented circulation. Some of the research groups have success in assessing healing potential by using the amount of interoperating bleeding from the skin flap. If it did not bleed sufficiently, they revised the amputation to a higher level. This technique is commonly used and highlights one of the reasons why tourniquet is not applied in foot amputations. In amputees who have undergone amputation secondary to vascular insufficiency, post-operatively it has been seen that with minimal ambulation they exceed 50% of their maximal aerobic capacity. In these conditions, anaerobic mechanisms are summoned to sustain muscle function and endurance is greatly compromised. Now, this is of an important concern because the shorter or the proximal segment is now bearing the weight of the processes. As a result, in vascular amputees, the muscles lose the endurance or the muscle cannot sustain ambulatory capabilities. In patients with traumatic amputation where vascular compromise is absent, a distal level of amputation is desired for maximal function. Here we see the factors which increase metabolic demands of walking. These are decreased residual limb length, increased or number of amputated joints if there is more than one limb amputated, and dysvascular amputation. The following table shows you the metabolic costs at various amputation levels, with Symes amputation level being 15% in increasing metabolic cost, whereas transfemoral amputation due to vascular insufficiency, the metabolic cost has been raised up to 100%. Now, when there is comparison between distal and proximal versus traumatic or dysvascular amputation, if we see the self-selected walking velocities, we will see that there is slower rate of walking in amputees who have undergone transfemoral amputation due to vascular insufficiency. This is a compensatory mechanism to conserve energy per unit time. The skin over the amputated segment is of an important concern because the incision location and the placement of the scars decide how comfortable would the person be with prosthesis. When amputating, the general principles of plastic and reconstructive surgery applies to incision location and placement of scars. After amputation, a painless, pliable and non-adherent scar is the primary goal of most amputation surgeries because it yields better to the prosthetic interface, because it is able to handle the shear forces of prosthesis. The socket designs also make the location of the scar of increased importance. When there is uncomplicated primary healing, the scars are non-tender, pliable, mobile and durable, and then location does not really matter. But if the healing is less than ideal and the scars become adherent, tender and thin, or non-durable, thick and prominent, then location of the scar and the incision matters a great deal. The amputation site in the lower extremity functions as the patient's foot, and therefore it requires a thorough reconstructive design to provide a durable interface for walking and transfer of body weight through prosthetic limb. The skin over the amputated segment is of an important concern because the incision location and the placement of the scars decide how comfortable would the person be with prosthesis. When amputating, the general principles of plastic and reconstructive surgery applies to incision location and placement of scars. After amputation, a painless, pliable and non-adherent scar is the primary goal of most amputation surgeries because it yields better to the prosthetic interface, because it is able to handle the shear forces of prosthesis. The socket designs also make the location of the scar of increased importance. When there is uncomplicated primary healing, the scars are non-tender, pliable, mobile and durable, and then location does not really matter. But if the healing is less than ideal and the scars become adherent, tender and thin, or non-durable, thick and prominent, then location of the scar and the incision matters a great deal. The amputation site in the lower extremity functions as the patient's foot, and therefore it requires a thorough reconstructive design to provide a durable interface for walking and transfer of body weight through prosthetic limb. That's why the skin should be managed very carefully to have a successful outcome. Vascularization of the skin over the amputated segment is important. It should be maintained in mind that the scar should not be adherent to the bone and it creates a problem with the prosthetic fitting. If the scar is adherent, then it gets crushed between the bone and the prosthetic interface, and there is a breakdown after frequent prosthetic use. The redundant soft tissue which appears after the flap is sutured over the amputated segment is known as dog ears, and it also creates problems in prosthetic fitting. Now there are three kinds of flaps which are used to cover the amputated segment. One is the anterior flap, second is equal anterior and posterior flap, and third is the posterior flap. Anterior flaps in lower limbs are used in traumatic amputations which do not have vascular impairment. Equal and anterior posterior flaps are full thickness fish mouth type of skin flaps and are favored in transtibial and toe amputations. When there is compromise in the vascular status, posterior flaps are used in transtibial amputation. As this cross-sectional area of the leg decreases, there is a lot of skin available to form a posterior flap. However, the formation of the suture line is usually anterior in cases of posterior flap, and it passes over the distal end of the tibia. This remains vulnerable to trauma and due to high pressure generated on this area while using of the prosthesis. To counter the problems associated with posterior flap, the skew flap methods of transtibial amputation has got advantages and also reduces difficulties faced by the patient, the surgeon, and the prosthetist in dunning and duffing of the prosthesis. Along with the fasciocutaneous flaps and free flap techniques, there is use of skin grafts in certain amputations, in certain cases of burns, and skin grafts are a viable option in amputation surgeries and prosthetic fittings. The grafts to be successful, they should not be adherent to the bone. Application of the graft should be over a cushion and a mobile muscle bed, and it is an ideal skin graft. Because there is a fine layer of subcutaneous fat to absorb shear, and grafts are much durable as normal skin. The grafted skin becomes pressure tolerant over time if the shear and skin stretch are moderated by careful and calibrated prosthetic fit, and introduction to the prosthetic walking is gradual. The amount of time wearing the prosthesis, the amount of force applied, and the activity levels must be carefully controlled and slowly calibrated forward. Over a period of many months, the limb with the amputation and the free graft coverage may develop a tolerance that can provide optimum function. Such patients can often use prosthetic devices successfully, thereby avoiding amputation at a higher level. Skin problems always remain a major concern for amputees throughout their lives. The amputation surgeon needs to be familiar with different types of short and long-term skin and wound healing problems. Post-operative infections, wound dehiscence, partial skin flap failure, these are common in and interfere with the short-term healing processes. Contact dermatitis, skin irritation, reactive hyperemia, callus formation, varicose hyperplasia, and folliculitis, along with epidermoid cysts and fungal infections. It causes chronic breakdown and causes long-term skin ailments. Complicated skin problems often require multidisciplinary approaches requiring prosthetist, wound care specialist, and dermatologist with the surgical team. Stabilization of muscles in amputation is an important principle of amputation. Muscle makes up bulk of residual limb soft tissues, and an amputee with a bony segment which is well padded with muscle and there is balanced residual limb is less prone to chronic pain syndromes. Maximum retention of functioning muscles is essential to provide residual limb with effective strength, size, shape, circulation, metabolic exchange, and proprioception. Proper muscle function depends on the maintenance of origin and insertion of the muscle, and the muscle should be stabilized with fixed resistance against which muscle can forcefully contract. This prevents progressive atrophy and weakness. Therefore, whenever possible, the section muscle should be attached and stabilized in order to retain muscle function and to improve the padding of the distal portion of the bone. Therefore, here we discuss 4 types of muscle stabilization that can be accomplished via surgical means, and this includes myofascial closure, myoplasty, myodesis, and tenodesis. Now, these closures have varying degrees of efficacy and efficiency in terms of muscle stabilization and preserving function. The first of the techniques is myofascial closure, and here the closure encases the transacted muscle by closing the outer facial envelope over the top of the muscles. Myofascial closure is not an effective means of muscle stabilization as it provides only minimal stabilization for the most superficial muscles. It does not provide adequate distal attachment of muscular tissue to the bone. Therefore, it is used in patients with severe ischemia, which prevents distal muscle fixation. The second technique of muscle stabilization is known as myoplasty, and this is performed in most of the diaphyseal amputations. Um, Here, the muscle bellies are transected, or that they get cut during the amputation, and it is difficult to attach the muscle to the bone if they have a thicker distal fascia, aponeurosis, or tendon. Um, this is the circumstance in the majority of transfemoral or transtibial amputation, where you transact the muscle bulk at the diaphysis, and it is one of the techniques where the muscles are brought over the end of the bone and sewed to the opposing muscle groups. Um, Unless these muscles become firmly stabilized by scar tissue, the attachment can work antagonistically or as a muscular sling, sliding back and forth at the distal end of the bone. And sometimes these muscles are just pushed to the side, and the bony segment is exposed, and it irritates the skin over it when there is use of the prosthesis. It often creates bursal tissue discomfort, and it can be identified on examination. And when you examine the patient, there will be motion and crepitance over the end of the bone. The frequency of the complications are more, that is, the tissue or the skin over the end of the bone is usually abraded when the person uses a prosthesis, and it is nowadays not recommended. Now, there is another technique of stabilization of muscle called myodisis. Here, the muscle groups are directly attached to the periosteum of the bone, and this is called as myodisis. The deepest layers of the muscles are typically secured directly to the bone, and the more superficial layers are sewn to each other as then done in myoplasty. And the myofascial envelope is then closed over the top of this muscular reconstruction. Now, the advantages of myodisis is that the muscles get a stronger insertion, and the muscles are now acting against the bony segment. That prevents atrophy and prevents weakness of the muscles. Now, myodized muscles continue to counterbalance the antagonists, preventing contractures, and they maximize the residual limb function, and hence they are better suited for prosthesis. Myodisis is contraindicated in severe ischemia because it increases the risk of wound breakdown. Now, here in this picture you can see that the residual femur is held in normal anatomical alignment following adductor myodisis. The benefits are that the femur will not wander within the soft tissues, and it will not reach to the edge of the bony. It will not reach to the end of the amputated segment. Here you can see a patient having transfemoral amputation, and here the myodisis has not been performed, and the femur has migrated to the edge of the amputated segment, and there is no padding of the distal portion of the bone, and it protrudes out of the soft tissues. Now, there is a final muscle stabilization technique called tenodesis, and it is very secure, but sometimes it is impossible to perform tenodesis. Tenodesis involves a firm distal attachment of severe tendon down to the bone, and it's most physiologic and effective means of muscle stabilization. and it is possible when the muscle belly itself is not transacted and the tendon is intact. The tenodesis is most commonly used in disarticulations like knee disarticulation, and it is a primary method of stabilization of muscles. Here, the patellar tendon is secured to the origin of cruciate ligaments on distal femur. When anatomical circumstances permit, distal attachments of muscle, tendon, fascia, or aponeurosis is should be attached to the bone directly. To optimize the effective residual limb muscle activity, the muscle should be stabilized at physiologic tension, and correct muscle tension varies from case to case, and the primary determinants of optimal tension um, remains at the discretion of the surgeon. There are no hard and fast rules, but determining correct muscle tension in amputation is similar to determining the tension of tendon transfers in hand and foot. Um, Mostly, the surgeons do not want to make it too lax or make it too tight, and they don't want to create an unbalanced tension. Otherwise, if unbalanced tension is there, there might be chronic pain. There are no specific guidelines for tenodesis. However, the tension in the muscles should be maintained from all sides. The other principle of amputation surgery is management of sectioned nerves, and it remains controversial aspect of amputation surgery. The free end of the nerve heals by forming a neuroma, and this intertwined mass of scar and nerve tissue may be painful to pressure, stretching, and other types of physical manipulation. A neuroma is a tumor-like thickening of a nerve in the region of the scar after amputation of the limb and is tender to pressure. Now, even when completely undisturbed, electrical potentials may still arise within the neuroma, causing negative local and distant sensory and motor phenomena. And these sensations can be bothersome and painful to the amputee, and they also prevent from adoption of prosthesis. While numerous techniques have been advised in order to minimize neuroma formation, none have been proven uniformly, and some methods include cauterization of the nerve ends using chemicals or heat, or burying the nerve in bone, encasing the nerve in impervious material, or ligating the nerve, or injecting the nerve with variety of chemicals. Um, the other methods include sewing the sectioned nerve to other nerves, or sewn them back on themselves by creating a nerve loop. Other methods are simply, that is, the nerves are retracted and they are divided. Neuroma formation to some degree is inevitable, and the generally accepted management procedure is drawing the nerve distally, sectioning it, and allowing it to retract away. So the neuroma, that is neuroma formation, as you see, is inevitable even after advances in the surgical methods, and therefore um, this management of transaction of nerves remains in practice, where the nerves are being pulled gently distally, and they are cut with a sharp knife, and the cut end retracts proximally to the level of the bone resection. Now, strong tension of the nerve should be avoided during this maneuver, otherwise, amputation stump may be painful even after the wound has healed. Crushing of the nerve should also be avoided, and large nerves such as sciatic nerve, which contains large amount of blood vessels, should be ligated. When a nerve is severed in the amputation process, the surgeon's goal is to position the nerve ending in well cushioned soft tissue, very much away from the incision site and the site of scar formation. This makes sure that there is no pressure from the prosthetic socket, and there is no irritation from any other contact. Now, neuromas in scarred and adherent areas are most symptomatic, and when working with these areas, the surgeon applies a moderate tension to the nerve, and the nerve just retracts away like the previous procedure, and traction of the nerve at the time of sectioning um, usually leads to proximal pain and neuropathy. So traction should not be too much. And there is another theory that when nerves and blood vessels are ligated together, the nerve continuously is stimulated by the pulsating vessel, and in this situation, the nerve endings sense the vessel's cadence and become source of throbbing pain. In transtibial amputation, two most common nerves which are ligated with vessel are deep peroneal nerve and tibial nerve. This happens if deep peroneal nerve is not separated off anterior tibial vessels, or the tibial nerve is not separated off the posterior tibial vessels. So, when a revision surgery is performed, the separation and division of this nerve away from religated vessels can relieve this throbbing pain. Now, extra caution should be taken while concerning the nerves, and particularly in upper extremity surgeries involving brachial plexus, nerves are often accidentally ligated with axillary vessels. When an amputation is performed, the bony segment has to be prepared appropriately, because the bone tissue is the primary tissue through which the forces are traveling between the processes and the residual limb, and large part of this force is retained through the bone in the amputated limb. Therefore, when bone are sectioned at a length, their bone ends should be smoothened and rounded, and in transtibial amputations, the anterior portion of the distal tibia should be beveled to reduce the pressure between the end of the bone and prosthetic socket. Um, Proper foresight and attention to bone preparation eliminates potential areas of high pressure in bone socket interface. There should be no sharp or angular surfaces in the palm of the hand or sole of the foot, and the distal bone in these areas should be in natural state as natural as possible. And when in disarticulation, it is a good idea to narrow the distal metaphyseal flare of the bone to prevent overly bulbous and enlarged distal stump. This is commonly seen in Syme's ankle disarticulation, and where contouring of the distal tibia and fibula are necessary, as bulbous and non-contoured distal stump will cause difficulties with prosthetic fitting. Protocol for successful management of periosteum is not defined, and in instances of diphyseal amputation, the children tend to form a new bone with periosteal and endosteal bone overgrowth at the end of the amputation. Now, capping the end of the diphyseal amputation with osteochondral bone surface can minimize bony overgrowth. And now, preparation of blood vessels is another principle of amputation surgery, and the most important principle is adequate hemostasis. That is, the major arteries and the veins should not be bleeding, should not be the sites of bleeding, and they should be double ligated. Bleeding from the section bone is controlled by pressure, and surgeon should always make sure that for a good wound margin healing, the subcutaneous tissue should not be divided, and the dissection should not damage the proximal blood vessels. In case of use of fasciocutaneous flaps, they should be even and broad, and attention should be given to their blood supply, especially in cases of people with vascular compromise like disease states in diabetes. Amputation sites are drained by suction drainage, and if the improper suction is performed, or if there is improper drainage, then there might be formation of hematoma which can become infected. So these were the some of the principles of amputation surgery, and I would recommend that you should keep the reading material side by side when watching this video.